everyone, and welcome back for the next segment of Sea of Life's Plastic Steward series. I am Paulita Bennett Martin, one of the two co-founders of Sea of Life, and I will be hosting this session. Last week, you got to hear from the co-founder of Sea of Life, Natalie Mielis, and she introduced you to the history of plastics. The second piece of this series is the current plastics crisis, where we went over all of the different ways that plastics impact our life. And then now we're in the third module, where we're speaking with two different groups of people. In one session, we're speaking with two people that have either are currently designing solutions for plastic pollution, or they are already implementing a solution in their local community. And then our second group of guest speakers is really exciting, because what we're going to hear about now is perspectives through culture and faith. And so today I'd like to introduce you to two incredible people: Hermina Glass-Hill, the founder of Susie King Taylor Women's Institute and Ecology Center. She's also a distinguished historian and a practitioner of faith-based conservation. She lives in the city of Midway in coastal Georgia, tucked away in the rural US South. We also get to hear from Jeremy Enriquez, an environmental and development expert who has worked to educate hundreds of people about the ecosystems of Belize by engaging his academic background in education, psychology, sociology, and development. Jerry, as he is known to his friends, was born in Punta Gorda and now resides in Belize City, and also published an incredible book called To Educate a Nation in 2017. So for today's conversation, we are going to be somewhat informal. We have a few big questions that we'd like to go over, but the purpose of this is to really hear about perspectives. Some people are motivated by projects and tasks and getting something done from A to Z when they hear about an issue, right? Those are often our sort of invention people or project people. But there's another piece of inspiration that comes from faith, it comes from culture, it comes from more conceptual thinking about an issue at hand. And so that's the conversation that we're going to have today. And we hope that you're able to pull from these things to have your own reflection about how plastic pollution impacts your life. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, and we will get into conversation. This going. How are you all doing today?
I'm doing fine. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so let's see. The first question that I'd like to throw out there, Hermina, I'm going to point it at you. And obviously, either of you are able to, speak to these different points. But one thing that stands out to me about your background and your history working in the environmental movement is that you've also spent a lot of time working in coastal southern United States, and which is in and of itself a rural area. And you've also spent a lot of time working in faith communities. Often both of these communities that we're speaking with are not centered in environmental issues or environmental conversations when we talk about nature and the environment and how it impacts our lives. What do you have to say about this? What are your insights? Is there an important role for faith communities in environmental advocacy and in environmental conservation? And have you seen this type of approach and these communities stepping in, specifically when you think about plastics? And also, if you do us a little bit of a favor, give us some context about your experience in this and why you have the perspective that you do.
Oh, sure. As a person of African descent raised in the southeastern United States, faith is central to our existence, it's central to our well-being. But this faith comes from the richness of the land, our relationship with the spiritual cosmologies that have been gifted to us from our ancestors, from institutions, and that being one of the central institutions and most important institutions to people of African descent in the United States, that being the Black church. And the Black church is not this static institution. It is a organic center of spiritual and creative expression. I work in interfaith. That doesn't mean necessarily the church, which is a Christian ideology. It's not necessarily Christian, but it certainly encompasses Christianity. For the interfaith community, that could be all kinds of ways of being and ways of expressing oneself in the world. It can be through Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Yoruba. It can be through any of those means of spiritual experience in the world. For me here in the Southeast, I grew up in a really culturally rich, centered and grounded community and family in which the earth is really important. We live by the earth. Everything that humans ever need comes from the earth. And so there is this sacredness about soil. There's this sacredness regarding water. There's this sacredness about the sky and the air that we breathe. And so with that, working in this interfaith earth care stewardship conservation area, is important to understand that these kinds of, and I'm using institution loosely, these kinds of institutions, the faith sector is deeply overlooked because many communities are centered around these sacred institutions. And out of that flows and flowers opportunities and ways of expressing oneself and ways of being that provides this rich, robust way of approaching our environment, how we live with it in this very integrated way, because somehow this Anthropocenic humanity in which we find ourselves, we have become accustomed to seeing ourselves outside of that cycle of life, when in fact, from whatever your creation cosmology is, we are all a part of this circle of life. And with that, we are no higher, no lower than the trees, the stars, the moon, the water, the whales, the frogs. People are a part of this spiral of life. And so as it relates to plastics and earth care stewardship, it's about understanding our role as humans and this wonderful, wonderful earth that we have been gifted with, and how do we nurture it? How do we live in harmony with it? How do we integrate our very lives with the soil from which we come? And how do you make it sacred? So when plastic is introduced into that, we think of the ways in which our creation cosmology stories have instructed us as to how the world was formed. And we respect these as sacred narratives, but we live in a world in which there is this idea of you can take from Mother Earth, and you can also give to Mother Earth what you don't want. And plastic plays into that, because this rich earth, it feeds us, it nourishes us, it provides everything that we need in terms of life. The number one a gift being breath. Breath.
Love that. Love that. Thank you, Hermina. We're going to have to come back to some of that too. So I'm gonna turn the conversation over to Jerry for a moment here and ask, just to kind of ground us, tell us a little bit about growing up a Garifuna man in Punta Gorda and your perspective as you saw plastics kind of creeping into your community. You had some wonderful things that you shared with me previously about just how different life was when you didn't think about disposable like culture, and what life was like before disposable culture. Could you enlighten us a bit on that?
Sure, thank you very much. Just to put in context what Punta Gorda was and what being Garifuna was in Punta Gorda, just for the broader context, Punta Gorda was this small town in southern Belize, the southernmost town, disconnected from most of the other parts of the country. There were no highways to get to there. In fact, a boat ride from Belize City took about 18 hours to get to Punta Gorda. And so you have this small Garifuna community that was sort of isolated from the rest of the country, right along the coast near the Caribbean Sea. Behind the town, it was very rich with forests and wildlife. Kids like myself used to go play in the forest, but we also had access to the sea. And so you had this small community of about 3,000 persons, mainly Garifuna. This was in the 1960s. And at that time, and part of the ethic of being Garifuna is I for you, you for me. That is a very underlying ethic of who we are as a people. Whatever we do will have an impact on others and will have an impact on the long term, not only on others, but on self also. Whatever we do to others at some point will affect us, whether in the present moment or it will ripple across to the future. So there was this intricate value of seeing our interconnectedness with nature, and that feeds into the things that we do. So we look at, just as Hermina said, just the earth for our sustenance. We were small farmers. We depended on the land to survive, but also we were aware of how we dispose of things, what we do. If we go to the store, we carry our own shopping bags. The stores provided paper bags. There were hardly plastics around. And if there was, we reuse everything. There was not this kind of, I remember Hermina mentioning before that this throwaway culture. People took care of their yards, make sure it is clean, the garden is there, there are chickens in the backyard. And so there was this kind of caring and being aware of what we're doing, because we were brought up to be aware about cause and effect. Whatever we do now will have an effect in the current or long term. And so we were careful about that. My grandmother, my grand-aunts, my mother, my uncles, they were all part of our growing up, guiding us and making sure that we are with that awareness. And so that we carry that through life as part of our formation. And it helps to protect what we have for future generations.
Beautiful. One other thing that you pointed out that seems so fundamental, but unless you stop to think about it, is what mindfulness means. And I believe that the note I took is just, mindfulness is just that, it's being aware of our actions and our consequences. And it sounds like you come from a community and culture that had mindfulness baked in to the way of life. So how would you say that the consequences of throwaway plastics has impacted you, your own thoughts and behavior, and maybe the thoughts and behavior of your community?
Of course, I did not mention that over time, we saw the gradual introduction and increase in plastics, and people also having very little regard as to throwing away plastics near riversides, near coastal areas, and then the expansive pollution that has resulted in. And I believe that as the culture assimilated into the broader Western capitalist system of consumption and increasing consumption, people lost the awareness of their actions on others and on earth. So as there was a demand for more and more material and consumption, people cared less about what the impact will be of using plastics and throwing it away and polluting the earth and the riverside. And then as big companies come in, they also want to market their stuff as more convenient. And there was never, even up to my young adult years, there was never, it was unheard of to sell water in plastic bottles, for example. Or when we went to buy soft drinks, it was in glass bottles that we took back to the store to get refilled. It was reused. And now as we see more and more throwaway of single-use plastics, everything is packaged in plastic, single-use plastic bags at the store. And so when we look at that, I think that we develop a more mindless culture rather than a mindful culture that had started. Because there's an increasing lack of awareness in the effects of what we're doing. Even though we might see it as destructive, there is a kind of don't care on people's hearts are not connected with what they're doing. And so there's a feeding into that system by large businesses, by individuals who become numb then to all of these things. And mindfulness brings that awareness as to the importance of and the effects of what we're doing. We're seeing within ourselves, we get an opportunity to look deep down within ourselves. We pause in silence, and develop a deep awareness of our own minds, because everything starts with the mind. And if we're not aware of the chaos in our minds or the numbness in our minds or whatever the state of the mind is, if we're not aware, all actions and behavior that is produced by that mind will reflect what the state of that mind is, whether in thought, in words, in action, behavior. It all starts with our mind. And I get the sense that unless people now take time to return to being very aware of the state of their minds, then we cannot reverse the trend without shifting the mind state and to really understand what is the deeper cause of this. So it's not just the economic system, because even that is produced by the mind, but really finding a way in which we could have compassion for ourselves and find a way to really understand, not at an intellectual level, but at a deeper level of awareness, to understand that the more we throw plastic and trash out there, the more we will have a bigger gyre of pollution in the ocean, for example. And I try to bring that awareness in the work that I do with students from abroad and from Belize. I've had a program where university students from the United States would come to Belize for an entire semester for 15 weeks. And it was that time that they were able to see for the first time, when they go to these small islands and they walk the coast and they see trash all along the coast. And that brings for a really deep awareness as to where did this come from? How did it get to this state? What is the root cause and what can I do? I've also done that for high school students from the US and from Belize, where they go on these field-based courses and they're able to observe firsthand and it really hits home to them, and it develops that deep level of awareness rather than sitting in a classroom and say, well, yes, there is plastic, but being able to connect to see the impact on wildlife, marine wildlife, on terrestrial, it makes a difference.
Yes, very, very much so, because it's not a mystery when you see it, right? It's something that you know what the issue is. It's the complexity of how to fix such a giant global issue at such a scale. So,
And to understand that each of us as individuals could be a part of that solution, yes.
absolutely. And then balancing, right? That we're part of the solution, but not to feel that you carry all the weight on you when you see these things. Because there's almost, what I'm picking up from in what you said is there's almost like a threshold where you see things happening in your community. And for many, maybe there is this threshold where you begin to kind of not care anymore because you've seen it happen so much, or you see the problem that you think that's just the way it is, or that's just it becomes the norm. So I want to bridge that over to this question for Hermina about, you coined this term before, eco-despair. I don't know if you coined it or if you read it or what, but I want to know, tell us more about that. What do you consider eco-despair?
Well, eco-despair is a term that I did not coin, but it is a psychological response to loss in the world caused by environmental destruction and climate change. And people have a real gut level, intimate response to these nuanced changes that we see in our world, especially if you are connected to the earth in this deep spiritual way, that you see yourself as part of every living thing around you, and you see the destruction, the degradation of plant life. You see deforestation. You see entire communities being bulldozed over for development. And this is development for leisure. This is development for, you already have a home, but this is for your summer home. You have everything you could possibly have in another location, but a part of what you desire. And this goes to what Jerry mentioned in terms of this capitalist worldview of accumulating material things. For me, how you counterbalance that eco-despair is by continuing to be rooted in truth, rooted in the truth that nature offers. Nature cannot lie. So if you're rooted in you reap what you sow. We reap what we sow. If you're reaping good things, if you're flowing all of that positive energy into the earth, into the sea, into our airways and the environment, what's going to flow into you is all of this beauty and love that Mother Earth and nature gives us every day. And we take these things for granted. Like Jerry was mentioning, we take these things for granted that you will always have a pure patch of green grass and beautiful, nourishing soil that's going to flower rutabagas and collard greens and tomatoes and all of those things for you. But if we don't have a consciousness of what we give out is what we will get, what we reap is what we will sow, we will find out in our bodies through the through what we have thrown out. The air, the soil, the water. Plastic is showing up in all of that, even in our foods. And so eco-despair is about this physiological and psychological harmony that humans have with nature, but we have managed in some way to sever our humanity and our relationship with nature in such a way that we don't recognize when we have harmed her until it becomes Cancer Alley, or it becomes, these causes of asthma that we see everywhere. So as a person of whose ministry is in ecological harmony, it's about getting back into focus, getting back into harmony, breathing, taking that moment, taking many moments to still yourself and come to what is most important to you.
Beautiful, thank you. Jerry, we're gonna come to this closeout question, which I think either of you may have a comment or response to. But I'm curious how you feel mindfulness and compassion can help us through these issues that are at such a global fever pitch right now, and how we can, how mindfulness and compassion can also help us to remain connected to hope. How do we keep that hope as sort of our central? And I'm going to throw up some slides as well, so hopefully that doesn't distract anybody, but we're coming to the end of our conversation, and I'd love to hear from Jerry and Hermina. If you have a closing word on this too, jump in.
Well, thank you. And I like the inspirational message that Hermina just brought about eco-despair, but that could shift with mindfulness, and mindfulness brings to us the awareness of the present moment for us to recognize that despite all that is going on, we personally can do our own to make changes. The past that we've seen can be changed in the present moment. So when we're grounded in the present moment, we can make decisions to be able to shift. It is the present moment that has profound influence in the future. So each of us could do something, and we cannot think that it is the end of the world. Of course, we can see the impact of mindless living and accumulation of material and throwing away trash. But each of us could make a conscious decision to decide how we're going to contribute for a better future, a future that is cleaner in our environment, in the air, the earth, the water. Each of us could do that, but we need to ground ourselves each day to be aware of what the consequence will be of our actions.
And I will share this concept, this African concept called Ubuntu. I am because we are. I am a part of the solution because we all are a part of the solution. If we could do what Jerry just shared with us, that we can become a part of the solution when we realize just how interconnected we are. I hear very often about eco-justice. Martin Luther King talked about 3 major things that need to be solved if we are to make progress in civilization. And those 3 things were the 3 evils of racism. The 3 evils include poverty and war. Racism, poverty, and war. which is essentially ecocide. If we can understand that the kind of justice that we would like to achieve for our oceans, for our air, for land, and the consequences that are harbored just by within our bodies. If we can understand that if I am to be free and live with this eco-justice, we have to attack this from a multi-faceted perspective. But you have to have hope in all of this. We have to live with, just as I talked about eco-despair, there's this eco-hope that there is enough moisture in the soil that when you or I or my children and my grandchildren and my children's children, their children's children, takes this seed and drops it into a hole in the ground, that it's going to sprout up and that it's going to nourish us. It's going to nourish this world. That's the kind of hope that we have to live for, that when one plants a seed, another will water, and another generation will live from that. So we have to live with eco-hope.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Hermina. That's it for today's session. I want to thank you for completing part 3 of the Sea of Life Plastic Steward course. The next thing that we're going to look at is a reflection. And this reflection this week pulls from the conversation that we just had. I want you to explore, write down, and discuss with your the students that you're currently working with. How does your own culture or faith influence your own thoughts on plastic pollution? Or how does plastic pollution test your own sense of culture and faith? Think about this question. There's no right answer or wrong answer. It's just completely about tuning into yourself and how this issue connects with your own life. And then next week, we will come back together, or the next session that you watch, we will come back together to talk about and summarize everything that was learned through these modules. And we will also send you away with a little bit of an assignment that's really fun, really reflective, and very mindful. So thank you for being a part of this. That's all. Have a great evening.